This is Pastor Nathan. Welcome to the Sitting With It podcast. Each week I sit down with someone from my congregation to discuss the past Sunday's sermon. I hope this helps all of us to go deeper with the sermon, thinking about it, digesting it, and living it out in our lives. Let's get into it. I've invited Carol King to sit with me this week to talk about the sermon from this past Sunday. And many of you know Carol, but for some of you, maybe she's a new voice, as they have been coming to Swamp for not too long. It's
Since
been
June.
Since June, yeah. So almost half a year. And the sermon this past Sunday was looking at, in the midst of the difficulties of life, but especially in the midst of the difficulties of the faith, when there's confrontation from the powers of evil, and we could get into what that means, right? But that the mission still remains, that we are still called by God to further the gospel, to be partners in the gospel, and we looked at different ways that happens, or what it means to actually continue in that, to persevere even when things are difficult. So I wonder, for you, as you were listening to the sermon and even reflecting on it afterwards, what are the main things that stood out to you or that were interesting to you from it?
Yeah, I think that the idea of using the word partnership, and then I went back and I looked at my notes and I looked at the Bible that I was using that day. I have two of the same version. One is really beat up, and the other one I can carry to church and not fear a page is going to fall out. So anyway, I looked at them to see what I had marked up before, and I hadn't really thought deeply about the partnership thing. I hadn't really thought about that, and that was a really wonderful thing to think about. And then to go back to my old Bible and the one I'm using now, and think about what does that mean? Because we're new here. We moved down here. We had to find a home, a church home, and I'm in a different phase of life. And what does my role in the partnership look like? So that was really important to me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what are your reflections on that as you think of what your role in the partnership looks like?
Well, because there are so few people here that we knew before we came, they don't have a clue of what my gifts, skills, interests, any of that. And so part of that has to come out of what have they observed in us while we're here. So I don't know what it's going to materialize. I know that I'm a writer. I write. And so I would assume that there's going to be some place that will find a home, and I don't have any idea. I thought about it this morning. I was writing a letter to a woman that her father was significant in my life when I was 9 years old. And somehow she found out my address and wrote to me, and I was writing back to her and telling her how significant her family was to me, that I was 9. It was the beginning of 5th grade, and her dad challenged us as a Sunday school class to find all the miracles in the book of John. Well, I didn't know you could learn stuff in the Bible. You know, I'd been in Sunday school for years, but I didn't have any. That was wonderful to me that this could happen. And her dad ended up leading Jim to Christ. So I don't know at this place in my life what it's going to look like here. I just hope that somebody says, "Oh, Carol King, she could do that," you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I reflected on even in preparing the sermon. And then afterwards, you know, sometimes you preach and then you're like, oh, maybe I should have said that differently, or what about this? And you realize things you hadn't thought through fully enough. But, you know, the sermon obviously was encouraging us towards thinking about being partners in the gospel and proclaiming the gospel. But the reality is we go through seasons of life, right? And there's some seasons that looks different than other seasons. And I think, you know, especially as we age and our energy levels change or our activities change, that's something I reflected on after preaching it a little more, is what was that sermon for? And you aren't at this stage yet, right? But somebody that's 20 years down the road yet from where you are, like, what does a sermon mean for them? Or even for a young child, what does it look like for them? So I wonder, as you reflect on your life, how has your partnership in the gospel changed over time? What does that look like?
I was a teenager at church camp, and we had a missionary, and they always give you an altar call. And the altar call was, are you willing to serve God on the mission field? And if you're not, pray that God would make you willing. So I'm a faithful. If you tell me I should do something, I'm going to do it. So for a year, every night I prayed that God would make me willing to go to the mission field. And I could hardly wait till the next year at camp. I wanted to go down that aisle because God had done a work in my heart. And I really had Africa in my mind, but I had no idea. I mean, I was at that point 15 or 16. And so anyway, to make a long story short, that was our first ministry on the mission field. God made my husband a teacher. He is a teacher, and he loves to help people. And so that's what we ended up doing on the mission field for not as long as we thought, because we were evacuated the first term, and the second term we got out of our own will just before another evacuation. So then we had to start over again in our 30s. What do we do? But that teacher thing, we both ended up at a Christian school. Jim for some time, and then he was at another Bible college, and then where we stayed for 30 years, 25 years, something, I don't know. I can't remember what your question was, but that's how we've spent our life, mindful of people who need to know Christ, and tied in with being a teacher. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd kind of asked of reflecting on how that partnership in the gospel maybe has changed for you over the years. And even you mentioned that the partnership maybe like metaphor or language was a little bit new to you, but I'd imagine the idea isn't, right? So I wonder what ways you have, like what made the idea of partnership stand out to you, and how have you maybe thought about your ministry over the years that feels different than that?
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about partnership, and maybe that's part of why it stuck out to me, because in my head, who else thinks about partnership? That's kind of, and so, and we both been talking about this being a new church, a new place. Where do we fit? Where do we fit? And the people have to get to know us to care about where we fit and to believe that we're going to hang around enough to have a part. And so it was really an in my face, God's thinking about the same thing we're thinking about. I think that's it. When I looked at my other Bible, and I looked at here's my notes, I ran out of space.
We should make them a little bigger.
Yeah. About twice as big. That would work for me. But it made me think about it more seriously, about, as a partner here, is anybody going to notice that I fit anywhere? Yeah, so it's just to be thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is a challenge when you're in a new community, figuring out how you fit. And I forget exactly where it comes from, but there's a book maybe or something that talks about church communities and the idea that each of us are like a Lego brick. And some people only have space for like 4 connections, and once they have 4 close relationships, they're all filled up. Yep. And some people have space, they're like one of the long Legos that you have space for like 12 or 20 connections.
Yes.
But that we all naturally tend to like to be full. And so when you come into a community, like in order for somebody to kind of bring you in, they have to actually be disconnected from somewhere else, and then and then connected to one of your connections. And so that was, I think of that metaphor sometimes of what it takes and requires for a community to be willing to open up space and make space for connections.
Oh yes, because it's not there everywhere.
Yep. Yeah. And then for those that are coming in to, like you said, of having a kind of an understanding of what it takes for others to do that as well.
Yeah, we were at one church after we left school. We were at one church, and I sang in the choir, and that was the extent of our ministry there, because I put myself forward. They said we need people for choir, and I'm not a vocalist, I'm not a soloist or anything like that, but I can make a joyful noise. So, But eventually there were other things that we knew that wasn't home. And so it was a matter of searching for home. Our first Sunday here, we walked in, and Jim always walks behind me, and I went in a pew to sit, and he wasn't behind me. And I turned around, and there he is at the back, and he's talking to Tracy, and he's talking to the missionary from Mexico. Maybe not Mexico, but he's on the border. And I looked back there, and my Jim was just glowing. He was so happy. He found kindred spirits, and he loved these guys, and it was just, oh my word, it was just like a gift from God, that's what we've been looking for since we moved, that there would be this place, that the connection would be there. And it was, I will never in my life forget that, turning around and seeing him so happy. It was just,
Yeah. Like you said, like the work of God that week, that it was the week you guys decided to show up. So when you think about the sermon, what other things maybe stood out to you, or what are things you kind of carried with you from
paper.
it?
I need more paper. I felt like there was so much that you had to say, that I wanted you to say it over a couple Sundays. I lost the little head points that you had there. I sailed right on by them. But I got to the bottom of the second page, and I'm writing about God accomplishing his work. The good we do is all of Christ. We must see who we are, knowing myself, who am I, and living that out before others. Anyway, I got there. And then you kept going. So I had to go over here and fit it in places. So I would like a bigger paper and maybe less actual, I'm going to remember these 3 things when I go home. I'm going to take them all week long and chew on them, because there was so much. And the thing that helped me was that in my other Bible, the older one that I had with me, I mean, that was so marked up. It was so marked up that I couldn't put any of this new stuff in it. So anyway, that's my only, because I'm your mother, I'm your grandmother, I would say to you, give us a big piece of paper and
a little less to chew on.
A little less to chew on. Yeah. Because if you have 2 or 3 things that it's your decision, you really want your people to take this away and think on it all the week, we need not so much. Yeah. For me. Yep. For me. I mean, you've got all these people who are accustomed to you and your style and all of those, and they've got a big framework of learning that I don't have here. Yeah.
Well, I actually had a realization over the summer. So, I mean, I've been lead pastor for 8 years, and a year and a half of that was COVID times, which was just a little different, right?
Very different.
And yeah, I don't know why it took 8 years for this to click, but over the summer, I realized there are still times where it's like Friday night or even Saturday night, and I'm like, do I have enough for a sermon? Like I've been studying, I've been reading, I have all these ideas, and I think I know what I'm going to say, but I'm like, I have this fear of getting up there and
running out,
finishing, and then realizing like that was only 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it clicked this summer. I have never preached a 15-minute sermon. I was like, why am I so afraid of not having enough?
Yeah.
I have preached some 45-minute and 50-minute sermons. Mm-hmm. Maybe I should be more afraid of that.
Yes.
So I actually, since the beginning of September, have changed my mindset. And my goal now is to preach a 15-minute sermon. Mm-hmm. And since then, my sermons have been 20 to 25 minutes, and I think they've been probably a little more manageable. And this Sunday, I was like, this is not a 15-minute sermon.
No, no, it was wonderful material. It was really wonderful material. But by the time I got to the second side, I thought, I'm never going to remember this. I'm never going to get home and chew this over. And when we get in the car from church, either before we hit the main highway or shortly thereafter, one of us will say, well, what did you think? Mm-hmm. And then we'll chew it over. But there was way too much. and it was wonderful stuff. It was really wonderful stuff. I came home and I rewrite notes, because when I get a mess like this, I need to rewrite notes. And then I go back and I add more, because there's so much. Your people are so blessed to have you as a real student of the word. I really loved that. And I loved it when I would hear you make reference to other things that you'd studied to prepare a message, because that, to me, communicated a genuineness of it all, and that you had done the work of distilling it, and we have the privilege of looking at what you've distilled and see how we can apply it.
In the midst of all of it, and I know there was a lot, I wonder, so the partnership idea was something that lingered. Is there anything else that has lingered for you or kind of stands out to you as something you've been chewing on?
Since we've retired, I've really worked on that, be an encourager. When I see somebody do something well, I really want to, like within an hour, do something to encourage them, because if you don't, you're going to be gone. It'll be way gone. But that is a ministry, and maybe in this part of my life, being an encourager is where it's at least for a while. That's where it's at, because if people aren't encouraged, then they think they did it bad. Or they think they're not valued, or that they made mistakes. And so I feel like I need to be more intentional, because I have been working on that. I have been conscious about encouraging people. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Are there other ways that you've thought about applying it? So kind of the encouragement and is one piece.
I guess the fact that none of us have to look at one person and say, well, I have to be like them. We don't have to be like anybody else, because God made us, and He made us for the places in life where we are. I've thought a lot about our being in Africa, and one of the Chadians said something about Jim. He was supposed to go out. Well, he established a pattern of going every weekend with another Chadian to the distant villages, because they didn't get teaching because they were distant villages. And it would mean living under more primitive circumstances when you did that. And the man that became Jim's closest friend and confidant and fellow, it was a Chadian, said, it's okay. His wife will think it's just fine. Well, that was really important to me, because I was feeling like I have 3 children to homeschool. I teach a women's class, but I don't get to be a missionary, Mm-hmm. But that taking care of our kids so he doesn't have to worry about it, those kind of things, giving him the freedom to do whatever God's called him to, that's ministering. And so it really helped me. I remember that conversation where we were in the house and had that conversation that there isn't any best gift. And I really, for a long time, because of the person that led Jim to Christ, because of that friend, and because our church was very, very missions focused, thought that, well, that was the only one that counted. Mm-hmm. And that I've come to know that, wow, the people that keep the church clean, they are very important. And I haven't found the answer to this question, but I don't know who does your grounds work, but it's magnificent. Yeah. And I would love to say to that person, you make coming to church every Sunday such a blessing, because it's like, it's so beautiful out there. That says, welcome, come in. And so that's an important thing I think that fits there, is that nobody's gift is insignificant. Whether you're folding the papers, or you call people that you missed at church Sunday, anything that you do in Jesus' name is equally important.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that is actually, if there was kind of a main thing I was hoping people thought about after the sermon, was that this idea of proclaiming the gospel, right? Partnering in the gospel, proclaiming Christ, that it looks different ways at different times. Mm-hmm. And there's all these things, there's things that are important in that, but it's not something we do alone. It's
Mm-hmm.
something we do together as a community.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you're saying, each of us has our own gifts and
Oh,
ways that we
yes.
contribute to that.
Yep. I think when God looks at the people that come in Sunday morning, that, oh, look, there's the one that's an athlete and coaches other people that are interested in sports, and they don't even know that that's a blessing, that that's part of the body. And there's that dear old lady who comes early and she plays pre-service.
Yeah.
Oh my word, I love that. That there's not anybody that has any part in this ministry that's insignificant. It might look different, but it fits who they are right now. And so that's what God expects of them. What is it right now? The guy who he hands out bulletins, he is such a friendly soul. I just appreciate him. So anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
when I
that's
think of
awesome.
partners, I think it just looks very different. And we just need to not say, because I can't do X, then I don't have much to offer.
Well, how about as you were listening, was there anything that maybe was unclear or that you would have like questions for clarification or things you maybe disagreed with that you thought, I don't know if that's what Paul was talking about here. I don't know if that's right.
Yeah. No, my only takeaway was give me half of that. Because it was all so important and so beautiful, and I want everybody to be able to take something easily away.
Yeah. I can tell that you are a teacher at heart.
Oh, I am a teacher, I've taught all these years. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love that. I love being able to give somebody something that makes them richer than before I came. And not that I am so great, but it's just that God taught me that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just a cool thing to see it being used, and you get a chance to use it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, is there anything else that you want to share either from the sermon or your reflections after it?
I would love to see people recognize that note taking is, I felt bad because I looked around and I didn't see a lot of other people struggling with paper and pen and their Bible and writing things. And I think somewhere, and I think it probably needs to start in a Sunday school, that we are, when we take notes, we're saying to God, your word's important and I want to get it. And I think that what started that all for me was when I was 9 and Fred Gardner said, there's stuff in John that's important for you to know. And if you know that Jesus did all these miracles, I mean, he didn't say this in class, but I think it was his goal. If we see that this man, Jesus, did all these miracles, well, he's pretty remarkable. I need to know more about his life. And so I think that taking notes is something to be cultivated. But I think if we can value that and help people see it as a valuable thing for them, because if it's a valuable thing for the people, then it's a valuable thing for the church. And it's a valuable thing for, I'm so excited about the groups that are going out to minister from Swamp. And I think they're taking with them all this good stuff. And maybe somewhere we can start have a class that people could take. How do you talk about a message that you loved? How do you bring that up? You'll laugh at this, but I had surgery in April and I had PT for a couple months. And I prayed that God would give me a way to talk about him to the PT people. Because we're still living such a cloistered life, as the people that don't belong here and don't know where Walmart used to be, those kind of things. And so I prayed, and my PT person happened to be a girl who had been raised in a church that had VBS. And so we were talking about that. And then we're singing VBS songs. And then there was another guy who was a PT person who joined us singing the PT song, the VBS songs. And then I got an opportunity. She was telling me about a heartbreak in her family to give her a book that I just happened to have 2 copies of it. That was a God thing. And so I think that if we learn how to normalize and not be afraid, because I remember being afraid to talk to people about Jesus. They'll think I'm a nutcase. But to make it just be something that I desire and that God helps me to see, and that it's not, you don't know Christ? Well, let me tell you the whole gospel. That's not good for anybody, really. I mean,
Right.
it may be. There may be just that person that God has made the meeting place, and that's what you need. Because I never imagined that my prayer that I would have something happen at PT that was going to be useful to the cause of Christ, I just, couldn't imagine it.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be such an amazing opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that heart. And I think that is what we need more of, is the desire, but then also taking it seriously enough to pray about it, to look for opportunities, and then to be willing to, like you said, I've seen this in my own life. Rarely is it, here's the whole gospel message, and you're walking somebody through the Romans road or whatever it happens to be, in terms of how you think about sharing the gospel. Like I've never done that, but I've had many conversations with people about Jesus.
Yes.
And people who don't know Jesus, but are interested in, and even if it's just part of our story, like you said, even if there's a message, and are we taking our own faith seriously enough that we have a word from the Lord, that we have something to share of, hey, this is something that's been really meaningful in my own life. And even if somebody's maybe not interested in the message, they're interested in you as a person. And so if it's something that's meaningful to you, it gives you an opportunity to share, and they can receive that, and it might be the first seed that's planted.
Yes, yeah. That you don't have to push it. You don't have to press them. You don't have to make them feel bad. You just, this helped me, or,
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Well, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for joining me. I think that was probably a better point than most I made in the sermon, and I hope that that's what people walk away this week with, is just looking for what's that small opportunity or small opening that God gives to be able to talk a little bit more about who He is, what He's doing in our lives, and encourage others to consider that too. So, yeah.
Well, it's been a joy to be here.
Yeah. Well, it's been a joy to have you. Thanks.
Thank you.